Hello, hello, my fellow geeks. This is the Indian App Geek, and I'm Vishal Mehra. You know, it's one thing to be geeky about airlines, about airports, about aircrafts, about aviation at large, but it's completely another to be curious about how does all of that falls into its right place. There's a very important ingredient, and we have the right chef on board today. Nitin Sarin, like all of us listening, is an aviation geek. He's also the managing partner of India's only aviation law focused firm. He's a qualified lawyer in India as well as a qualified solicitor in the United Kingdom, known to represent aircraft lessors, banks, and other financial institutions in India. An avid aviation photographer, Nitin also works in the drone and space sectors. And today he is with us right here. Hello there, Nitin. Welcome to the Indian App Geek.
Hi, Vishal. Thank you for having me. I've heard a lot about your wonderful presentation, and it's an honor for me to be here with you.
Tell us about your background, Nitin, and what got you interested in aviation.
Well, Vishal, that's a bit of a complex question, but the basic crux is that I come from a family of lawyers, and my father especially has worked very hard in his lifetime in his legal career. And it just so happened that whenever we had summer vacations, he needed to get out of the city or needed to get out of the country. Otherwise, he would be bombarded by clients all the time. So that coupled with the fact that in 1992, my elder brother Nikhil got a Singapore Airlines scholarship to Singapore, after class 10. Those two facts together made us travel very often and resulted in lots of time spent on an aircraft. As a result, the spark, inside me really got, lit. And, things like flaps and different parts of the aircraft were always an interest. And my dad was always there to answer those questions as much as he could. And that was really where my interest sparked from and is the genesis of.
And that led you to running an aviation law firm somehow?
Well, that's another bit of an interesting question. As I said, I come from a family of lawyers. So when I was at that age where I had to decide what I wanted to do, I was fairly aimless, in all honesty, because it was a bit of a confusing phase in life. I didn't know what to do. And so the obvious choice was me to join law, which I did do. While I was at law school, I, decided to see and check whether I could combine my passion with what I was studying. And at that point, I happened to check online at that point, and there were two universities, Leiden in the Netherlands and McGill in Canada, that offered a master's degree in air and space law. And, not knowing anything about the content of those programs, I took the plunge. I got a lot of support from my parents who allowed me and, financed my higher legal education in the Netherlands at Leiden University. And that coupled with another very unique fact in which you'll be interested to hear, is that I went and did my master's in 2008. And the unique part about 2008 was that was the time of the financial downturn, resulting in only three of us being in that LLM program in the Netherlands. So we got a real one-on-one sort of experience with the teachers, with the professionals who we met, and that really sparked my interest in aviation. And I also procured an internship with AirCap at that point. This is now 2008, I'm talking about, where I joined aircraft finance and had absolutely no clue about what it meant. I came back to India and got my first break, which we'll talk about in a while. And from then, there was no looking back.
That's fascinating, Nitin. You run a company which primarily deals in aircraft finance related matters. Can you explain to our listeners what all does that entail?
Well, yes, I can. It's very important for everyone to understand that when we're talking about aircraft, we are not talking about any other sort of asset. We're not talking about cars. We are not talking about trains. Um, Now, the reason aviation is so, and aircraft in particular is so unique, is the high cost of acquisition of the asset. We're talking about each aircraft. Now, any A320 you fly on is upward of, we're talking about thousands of crores. We're not talking about hundreds of crores. So that's where the aspect of aircraft finance comes in, because going back to the 50s and 60s, when aviation was really coming about after World War II, which really saw the spurt in global civil aviation. Most airlines own their assets, their aircraft, because assets were cheaper. Airlines could, fund them through their cash flow, etc. But as time went by and values rose tremendously because safety, increased, the manufacturing processes, and changed, etc. That resulted in aircraft becoming very high value, resulting in people requiring financing. Now, when you finance an aircraft, it's very simply that someone is looking for money to buy an aircraft. And all the legalities that are involved in that, all the paperwork, all the security aspects, because as you can imagine, it's a huge amount of money running into billions of dollars. All those legal aspects is our 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 speciality, essentially. So that's where we come in. So it's really a combination of finance law, it's a combination of tax law, it's a combination of international treaty law, etc. So it's that's what aircraft finance is in a nutshell.
Suppose an airline based out of India orders an aircraft with a manufacturer in France or in the United States. What's usually the role of a firm like yours in such cases? How does an aircraft acquisition happens?
Well, Vishal, that's a very interesting question, which a PhD thesis can be written on, to be honest, but I'll try to summarize it. So,
Sure.
the role of a lawyer or law firm comes in at the very, very nascent stage. So, it could even be when an airline is looking for a particular asset. Now, we must bear in mind that we get calls, I wouldn't say every day, but every other week, about enthusiastic Indians wanting to start airlines. And, my first question to them is, what aircraft are you looking at? And they have no answer to that. And that's how we can sift through people who know what they're talking about vis-a-vis people who are just looking at it as a business case. Now, the reason I say that is because the choice of asset is paramount, not just by how much it's going to cost you to operate, but also residual values, also all other aspects as spare parts, serviceability, and those really make up a lot of decisions for people as to what aircraft they're going to choose. Now, once that stage is done, then there is a tremendous amount of legal work that comes in, whether it's approaching the OEM or the manufacturer, negotiating purchase agreements with them. While you after you sign a purchase agreement and before delivery, there'll be lots of stages which will come up for pre-delivery payments, as they're called. There is pre-delivery payment agreements and financing and loans, that require paperwork. When the delivery is coming up, there is another whole set of documents and paperwork that's required. Lots of airlines will finance the pre-delivery payment as well as refinance at a later stage when delivery is coming up. So there's that paperwork that's involved. There is aircraft leasing, sale and leasebacks, where an airline will go to a manufacturer and take delivery and immediately back to back will sell it and lease it back from a leasing company. That's the model a lot of our Indian airlines have been following.
Yeah.
That lease work is also important and comes in. So it's a tremendous amount of aspects where lawyers get involved. And I have seen in my experience, I haven't got to that stage yet, but lawyers who are better technical people in relation to aviation than actual technical people, because they have to understand the A to Z of everything related to the technical aspects, which is very interesting.
All of this is very interesting. How does an aircraft acquisition goes through? So you were just telling us about these frequent calls you receive from folks looking to start an airline. Let's say you get a call from someone who's serious and has a viable business plan and knows his aircraft. How does that first acquisition happens?
Well, you see, the first acquisition is always a difficult one, because for every new airline, their balance sheets are basically starting out afresh. Their financials are just starting out afresh. So it takes a lot of convincing for someone who owns an asset, let's say a leasing company or even a manufacturer, to agree to provide an aircraft. Because you see, there are a number of factors involved, as I mentioned. A leasing company, for example, will not want to lease an aircraft to an entity that doesn't have a proven financial record. So, the airline has to convince the leasing company that they are in a good position to, make good their obligations. So that's one hurdle which airlines have to cross. Secondly, you'll be surprised if you want to go and buy an aircraft from one of the major manufacturers, they will very likely carry out a very stringent background check on you because they don't want to, sell an aircraft and book valuable slots and make valuable commitments, which will not be kept by an airline. So the first step is always convincing the other party that you have a wise business model and that you deserve this aircraft and that after X amount of time you'll actually be making money with that aircraft. So that's really the first stage in any aircraft acquisition. After that, and I'm going to just very briefly mention that is your the airline's ability and the airline's obligation, I would say self-obligation, because it's a very vital part of every airline,
Yeah.
is to negotiate very valuable commercial terms into your agreement. So now when we're talking about airlines like Indigo, airlines like Southwest, those guys are on top of their game. They know exactly what price they want what asset at, and that is 90%, 99% of the game.
Whom do you primarily work with? Is it airlines or is it lessors? What all do you assist them with?
Well, you see, by default, and I'm not complaining about that, we have become lawyers who represent banks and leasing companies who are either looking at some exposure into India or who already have exposure in India. Uh, and that basically means that we are there to assist them in securing their asset at both stages, at the beginning stage when the asset is being leased into India, as well as at a subsequent stage in case there's any default. So we help them in getting their aircraft back. We have also in the past worked for airlines, but we have tried to stay clear of that, lest there be any conflict, for us to not represent some of our banks or leasing company clients, in particular transactions. But we have over the years, as I mentioned, we've done a lot of work with Indigo for matters not related to aircraft financing. We have done a lot of work for other airlines also, and it's been a big learning curve over the years.
Do you work with airports as well, Nitin? If yes, in what role?
We have worked with airports in the distant past, but not very closely in the recent past. We have worked with vendors who are looking to set up, things like kiosks and other services at airports. Now, now that you bring this up, it's very interesting for you to note that, we all know about the new Noida airport that's coming up. For
Yes.
those, things like setting up kiosks, foreign exchange, commercial activities have already started. So we are working on several transactions which are already dealing with people who have the foresight that they are going to be location and positioned in that airport. And, that process has already started. So from that perspective, we are heavily involved in those things.
Lots of chatter on X about the upcoming Noida International Airport of late. Is there a difference in buying a commercial jet vis-a-vis a corporate jet in the country, especially from the perspective of the role that you and your firm plays?
Yes, it differs fairly substantially. Now, the reason for that is, look, a corporate jet client or a corporate jet purchaser is possibly going to be doing that as a one-off. Let's say a one-off in 10 years, a one-off in 15 years.
Correct.
So the whole attitude and the angle at which these are analyzed is completely different. So there's a lot more flexibility, let's say. There's a lot more, the decisions are made by fewer people. Let's just say that, as opposed to someone on the likes of who's got 100 aircraft on order, because they will want standardization. They would want one sort of clause, one sort of agreement amongst all of those 100 aircraft. Whereas a corporate jet, or a business jet, on the other hand, it'll be a one-off purchase agreement. It'll be a one-off lease agreement. So there is a big difference. And in India, especially, the business jet sector is a fairly unorganized sector at the moment, because the simple reason for that is the larger boys, the Tatas, the Ambanis, the Reliances, etc., are they already have a very well established system in the non-scheduled operator arena. But there are a lot of business houses in India who have made a tremendous amount of money and continue to do so, who are now looking at, they're done purchasing the Rolls Royces and Maybachs. They are now looking at buying aircraft assets. So there are a lot of these guys coming into the market. So it's a very unorganized sector from that perspective. They think it's like buying a car, which it's not. So that's been a very interesting aspect and a big differentiator between the commercial aspect and the private jet aspect.
Gift City has been hailed in the media as the aircraft leasing hub of India. Talks from government also in that regard. Have you worked with entities based out of there? What's been your experience so far?
Gift City, it's interesting you bring this up. I was just on a webinar yesterday with Gift City and the Embassy of India in Ireland. And you see, the Gift City initiative is a very novel one. And I say that because this, contrary to what a lot of people understand, started several years ago. It finds its genesis in this project report, which is called Rupee Raftar, where the Ministry of Civil Aviation got together virtually all the large players in the industry, sat them down and said, please help us carry out this research, because we want to set up a leasing platform and a leasing arena whereby Indians, or actually the rest of the world, can finance and lease through this big giant called Gift City.
So
Now,
MoCA sitting
yes,
down with the airlines and asking for opinion.
not only airlines, they sat down with
All
Airbus, they
all
sat down with
all
Boeing. Yes,
stakeholders.
yes, correct, correct. And
And
they
which
carried
year
out,
is this?
this would be I think this would be starting around 2016, 2017,
Okay.
carrying on for several years.
All right. Okay.
And it's they analyzed every angle of it. What is GST, how much GST is payable, with the main aim to amend the laws and regulations to make it as as feasible for someone to lease through a Gift City entity as it is to lease through Ireland. As you know, Ireland has negotiated double tax avoidance treaties with most of the world in a
Yeah.
very favorable atmosphere. So the main aim of Gift at that point was to amend laws, to see what needs to be changed, etc., so that people can now start leasing through Gift City. Over the years, they have come out with several policies which are very, very good policies. But their main problem, let me start by saying, starting with the negative, why a lot of the large aircraft leasing companies are not going there. The main reason for that is that these leasing companies are so well established in Ireland already. They need a very good case study and a very good reason to move lock, stock, and barrel from Dublin to Gift City. So a lot of them are asking these questions. We get questions every day. Should we move to Gift? And the whole answer that we have for them is that you can, absolutely, but please analyze it as to what benefit you get being based in Gift vis-a-vis Dublin. And a lot of them are waiting and watching. I think that's why there's been a little bit of hesitancy in the beginning of, in gift, but a lot of people are waiting and watching. And their main question is, where is the Indian money, in gift? We want to see more Indian banks financing. We want to see more Indian entities coming into the arena. And then, we want to take the plunge. So it's not a question of if, it is a question of when, Gift City really sparks and becomes a self-oiled machine.
I remember AI's Air India's first A350 acquisition was done via finance lease transaction at Gift City, right?
Yes.
Been any other high profile transactions since then, Nitin?
I believe apart from the Air India transaction, even Indigo has either signed or is in the process of signing transactions through Gift. And, just Vishal, one important point I want to highlight there, which I highlighted yesterday also, that the whole purpose of Gift should not be to compete with Ireland. It needs to find its own sweet spot, which I believe it is finding now in finance leases. I don't want to get very technical, but there is a big advantage of having a finance lease through Gift, but to the Indian entity, not to the foreign entity. So that seems to be one sweet spot which is, cropping up. But, apart from Indigo and Air India, I think these two are the largest transactions that have happened through Gift. And we are hoping to see more in the near future.
Let's say Indigo, leases an aircraft or rather buys an aircraft from Airbus, leases it back, sells it and leases it back from a lessor. Now, if
Yes.
that lessor is based out of Ireland or India, does that matter to Indigo?
It does matter to Indigo, yes. It's very important for Indigo to have that entity being based in Ireland for the sole purpose that the double tax avoidance treaty between India and Ireland says that any amount that Indigo, for example, will remit to Ireland will be free of withholding tax, and that entity will be taxed only in Ireland and not in India. So from that perspective, an Indian airline has a benefit to ask the counterparty to be based in Ireland so that those benefits may be accorded to the lessor. Otherwise, if those benefits don't accrue to the lessor, they will come ultimately back to Indigo because they are the ones who are using that facility of that lease and that financing.
There have been issues lessors have had in repossessing aircraft from Indian Airlines, and I know you have helped out some lessors in the past in similar situations. In your experience, does that make it difficult for airlines in good standing to have issues with respect to their financing and leasing?
Absolutely. India's track record has been fairly dismal, I would be very honest to say. Not for the lack of the ministry's focus or the lack of the ministry's attempt, but at every insolvency, every bankruptcy, there's been some new problem that has come to light. Whether it's Kingfisher, whether it's Go First, whether it's Jet Airways, each one has shown a particularly unique problem which someone did not anticipate earlier, which someone did not, see or, think about previously. So everyone has learned according to those issues. And I will also say very candidly and honestly that the ministry has been absolutely fabulous in, in coming to the help of leasing companies and entities, understanding that, 99%, well, 90, above 90% of the fleet is through, aircraft leasing companies. So, yes, we have a fairly, abysmal track record, but have we made progress? Yes, we have. But you're right. Who does it hurt? India is still looked at as a very unpredictable jurisdiction, and no one knows what's going to happen in the next insolvency. Um, who does that hurt? That hurts the newer entrants into the market. That hurts the startups that are coming into the market because people will be very scared and very hesitant to lease a new high value asset to a new entity. So while Indigo may not have a problem, Air India may not have a problem. Even though, let me put that in brackets, that people have been fairly concerned about even the larger names just because it has the India tag. But those big boys can give a lot of assurances, and they work it out. But it's the newer entrants who find it very difficult. So that is where we have to work very hard. We need to get the Cape Town Convention properly enforced in India, which will put us on a more level playing field, give a little bit of relaxation to the whole industry, and as a result, bring down the cost of acquisition of aircraft and credit.
For those of our listeners who are not so sure about the Cape Town Convention, can you help us understand, please, about that a little bit more?
Yes. So the Cape Town Convention is basically an international convention which came about in 2001. And what that does is it deals with a number of assets. It deals with mobile assets. Number one, with aviation or aircraft assets. And number two, it deals with rolling stock. So, trains and locomotives. It deals with space assets. And it also deals with high value farming equipment, etc. Now, India has ratified the convention and the aircraft protocol. So, aircraft, rolling stock, space, farming equipment all come under separate protocols, which countries can separately, adhere to, or separately, basically sign up for. India has signed up for the convention and the aircraft protocol. So, what that essentially means is that because aircraft assets are changing borders, they're crossing borders just by nature of what they do. This tries to make an international legal regime where if Vishal's financing an aircraft for Nitin, and Nitin is operating it in a third country, that third country will recognize Vishal's rights in that asset. So what that tries and aims to do is to standardize legal procedures and legal regimes around the world, so that the financing entities get their fair share of recognition of title and their interest in that asset, irrespective of where that aircraft is. Now, that also allows for easy repossession, easy deregistration, etc. And that is why, despite India having ratified the convention, we need to bring it into local law. So there needs to be a Cape Town Convention Act of Parliament, which is passed, whereby all other laws will be overridden and basically overridden. And that will allow a creditor or a financier to come in case of a default, file a single piece of paper, get deregistration, and procure export from India, which at the moment, deregistration is fairly straightforward. So you can ground the aircraft, but export is a bit of an issue at the moment. And that's what the Cape Town Convention, if brought into local law, will fix.
You were just talking about how the ministry has been fabulous and very helpful. What steps do you think MoCA or DGCA have to take to make India much more attractive for aviation companies or lessors? How we have ratified Cape Town Convention, but implementing it, would these things help? What else can we do?
Well, I think apart from the Cape Town Convention, proper implementation will go a long, long way. I don't think we need to do much more. But at the same time, I think what the ministry could really work on is a little bit of consistency. For example, if there's an insolvency tomorrow, I am not able to give my client a clear-cut legal opinion or answer as to what the reactions or actions will be from the various government entities. So I can't go and tell a leasing company client that, look, tomorrow you have a default situation with a particular airline. Tomorrow, if you want to go and pull the plug, that Indian Oil won't come out of the woodwork. The GST department won't come out of the woodwork. That the customs won't come out of the woodwork and start demanding dues, which are of course payable by the airline, but demanding those dues from the lessor. So I cannot give a definitive answer to any of my clients. So that kind of makes it a very shaky jurisdiction. So if the ministry could work on aspects like that, where a one-stop shop solution, that would be very helpful, and give a little bit of predictability as to what would happen in India in a particular circumstance.
Few minutes back, you had mentioned about high value assets, Nitin. Besides aircraft, other high value assets include engines, right? How is engine financing different from aircraft financing?
I think the first difference is that engines have always been treated at a slightly lower, they've always been put at a lower pedestal than an airframe. Now, when you ask, you ask why, a simple answer is the current DGCA regulations, they don't record ownership rights in engines. They do on an airframe, but nowhere do they ask you, who is the owner of the engines, that are affixed to your aircraft. So they take a lot of risk. The engine leasing companies, unfortunately, do have to take a lot of risk. Because they don't have such a clear cut path forward. They will always have to run, the longest mile. They'll have to go to court. They'll have to prove that the engine is theirs, etc. As opposed to, an airframe owner who can, just show a certificate of registration and prove her or his ownership. And apart from that, there are certain jurisdictions in the world who have very strange, well, I shouldn't call it strange. That's, a very well-established system of law. But there are certain jurisdictions in the world that consider engines that have been installed on an airframe to become the property of the owner of the airframe. So let's say I am an engine lessor. Vishal owns, an airframe. I, Nitin, lease Vishal two engines. There are certain legal regimes in the world, not in India, who believe that the moment Nitin's engines are installed on Vishal's aircraft, Vishal becomes the owner of that aircraft, of those engines, because those are an integral part of the whole aircraft. So
Even
they
though
are,
those engines are on lease.
yes, that's correct.
Crazy.
That's correct. So, yes, so engine lessors and engine financiers have to be very, very careful. And, usually that's seen in the higher cost of leasing such assets because, they have to absorb a lot more risk.
Out of the three aspects of aviation law, which is regulatory, which is financial, and passenger rights, what keeps you most busy with respect to the Indian market?
Well, Vishal, that's a very interesting question, and that's something that is in my mind every day because at the end of the day, I'm responsible for procurement of work. I'm responsible for keeping my very, very highly talented and hardworking team, keeping them in business essentially. So it's been a very interesting ride. If I may start with a statistic, as far as the aircraft financing work goes, I think we are doing less than 5% of all the work that there is. So we are very bullish on how much work increase we can see in the aircraft financing sphere. But we've seen that whenever the aircraft financing work tapers down, we have always seen a large spike in the regulatory work. So just for a little bit of context, because we don't work for Indian Airlines, we are okay with working for international airlines. So we do a lot of consulting and regulatory work for some of the large international airlines. So it's been a mix of the two. Lots of financing. If the financing goes down, there's a lot of regulatory happening, but we've kept ourselves busy. And the third aspect with customer or consumer disputes, etc. We've Even though I've done a lot of it in my career, I've tried to stay clear of that because anything related to a court is time consuming, it's expensive, and a lot of these claims are not very high value. So it's very difficult to justify charging a decent fee to our clients when the whole claim is for a refund of 50,000, 1 lakh, etc. So it's been a very interesting mix of all three. One aspect in the consumer department where we do get involved is where airlines will come to us and say, look, there's a consumer dispute that has been filed, we want to settle out of court, either because their insurers have said so or they realize they're at a weaker footing. And that's where we get involved to try, our negotiations team will reach out to the complainant and try and figure out a settlement between the two. So we have done a lot of that work, but apart from that, it's been very organic. I don't know where the work will come from tomorrow. But it's just been a very fantastic mix, and I'm learning as I live.
You also work on UAVs, you work on drone related laws as well, if I'm correct. What's the progress on that front as far as our laws are concerned?
Yes, Vishal. In fact, we have been doing a lot of exciting work in that space. I'll be very honest. In the beginning, I was slightly skeptical about how commercially viable that would be for us as a firm. But we've signed on some major clients, whether it's the Google guys, Amazon guys, and several other people who are very exploratory right now in their ventures in India. And that takes me to to answer your question. The drone laws of India have seen a tremendous change over the last 5 years or so. But we are still awaiting a number of regulations. For example, uh, beyond visual line of sight regulations are still awaited. Now, what that means is that if I want to deliver any package, but the drone or UAV is flying beyond my visual line of sight, I cannot do that legally at the moment. Those trials have been conducted and the regulations are still awaited. So there are a number of pieces of the jigsaw puzzle which have to still be put in place. But it has been very, very interesting, the journey thus far. And that is a huge potential market in India in the next, 2 or 3 decades.
And finally, anybody following you on X knows fully well, Nitin, about your love affair with Emirates. What's so special about them?
That's a funny one. So number one, I'm probably the worst Emirates customer because I haven't bought a revenue ticket for several years now. I am also a big credit card enthusiast, and I have used several credit cards, for points, and I do, milk them to the max as much as possible. And that results in a lot of Emirates flying, particularly in first class. I cannot afford it. Let me be very clear to all the listeners. But if not for those credit cards. Now, you see, the thing what I love about Emirates is it is standard, it's standardization. You know what you're going to get on board, which aircraft. I get a lot of flack that, oh, you're such a Emirates flag flyer, but you're always flying first class. Yes, I agree with that. But if I was to fly business class, I probably wouldn't fly Emirates because they have that ridiculous 232 on their 777. So it's not like I love Emirates, but they are consistent. The Dubai airport is like a mini, city. Your flight gets late. For example, you have an email prior to that saying that, you've been rebooked on the next flight. We have a hotel room ready for you. So it's just that, the excitement of the product, the services that are provided on board, the food, I'll be very honest, the champagne and the wine are absolutely fantastic. Their selection of, in-flight entertainment is you can't compare that to anyone else in the world. So it creates a very comforting space for me, at least. I can get on, I can watch a movie, I can have a drink, I can have something, delicious to eat. And I know what's going to be offered when, at how, and at what consistency.
All right. Nitin, I just want to conclude now by thanking you for your time. This has been awesome. Thank you very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Vishal. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to being of assistance ever in the future.
What a brilliant episode. This is the reason, frankly, I do this. I do this to get smarter, and people like Nitin make you smarter. Well, time to say the usual before we say Vadia Ji for the week. As always, we are streaming on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Amazon, and all other major podcast apps. Do take out those 30 seconds, rate us, leave us a feedback. It helps. And with that, I wish you well and happy flying, my friends.